Welcome everyone to today's lesson where we are going to be learning about two things in coding. The first is going to be looking at the goto command in programming. So this allows you to essentially jump to different sections of your code, because as you've kind of seen so far with the previous lessons, code has a tendency to execute from top to bottom, so kind of like a waterfall. And what these goto commands allow us to do is they allow us to bring our execution back up somewhere, wherever we put a label, and that way we can create certain loops. So what this goto command requires is a label that you can use for it to go to. So if I just push this down a couple of lines, and I'm going to put here a label, so I'm going to name it place like this, and I'm going to put a colon. You'll notice that the color changes, which means basic 256 is recognizing it as a label. And then what I will do in between the label and the goto command is I'm going to put a couple of print statements. I'm going to say print, and we're going to say first line like so, and then I'm going to say print second line like so. And then what I'm going to do on the fourth line is I'm going to say go to place. Now before I run this, just think about this for about 10 seconds and consider what this program is going to do once it executes. So let's have a look. We're going to press run and see if your predictions were correct. So what do you think is actually happening here? See, what's happening is every time the code executes line 4, it then jumps back up to line 1 and then drops down like a waterfall again, executing these lines of code. And what we could do to see that is if I use the debug mode, so instead of run, I'm going to use the debug mode, it's going to position itself on the first line and it's ready to execute the first line. So we're going to press next step here. Now, you may think nothing actually happened when that line was executed, but what ended up happening was the label place was created in memory, and obviously we don't see anything visual on our screen that it happened, but it did happen in the background. Now, line 2, if we were to execute this, would obviously output the statement first line on the text output. And then we're going to execute the third line, which is basically the third line of code is going to output this statement second line. And now we are ready to execute the fourth line. So if we execute that, notice what happens. We end up jumping to the top again, and that way we create this loop which essentially outputs the statement's first line and second line infinitely. Okay? Now, if I stop this and run it again, you can kind of see that infinite loop. So if I stop this and scroll up the text output, you can see how many times it's been output. Now, the labels don't necessarily always have to go at the top of the program. So if I cut this like this, and I'm going to paste it on line 5, and I'm going to say print third line like so, and then we're going to say print fourth line, and we're going to press run. So it's going to execute it from line 1. I want you to just think before I run it, what do you think this program is going to do? So let's run it and see what happens. So what happened to the third line? What is the reason why the third line, the print command with the statement third line didn't actually output to the text output? And the second question I want to ask you is, why is this not a loop anymore? So the reason why the print command with the statement third line did not get output, we can see that if we run it in debug mode. So we're going to output first line, second line, and then you can see that this goto command is going to essentially skip the third line and execute the fourth line like so. So if we just execute that, and then the program ends because there's nothing to actually, loop the execution of the code back to the top. But of course we can create that. So if we create a start label up here, and at the bottom of the program we can say go to start. So this tells us that we can have multiple go to commands here and multiple labels. Then we can of course press run, and then you can see that we've created again an infinite loop like so. Now the other thing that you can do is you can use these go to commands with if statements. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say counter equals 0 like so, and here at the end of the program what I want to do is I want to basically say counter equals counter plus 1. So every time this line of code is executed, it's going to add 1 to the counter, which is starting at 0. And then underneath that, I want to start an if statement. So I'm going to say if counter is less than 5, then basically execute this line of code here, which says go to start. So what this allows us to do is kind of take care of that problem of an infinite loop, because infinite loops in programming are not a good thing. And this will only jump or go to the start label as long as the counter is less than 5. So in fact, we can actually do this. We can say print counter right here. And if you recall, counter is a variable which can hold a specific value. So if I run this entire program now, let's have a look what happens. So if I scroll to the top, we can have a look at what the program did output. So we obviously know it's going to output these 3 lines, and then of course we output the variable 0. Then we've got these statements again, counter 1, 2, 3, and 4. And once it reached the value 5, then we did not execute this statement right here because the condition ended up being false. Okay, now your teacher is going to give you 3 activities to do with go-to statements as a starter. Have a look at them please, and all the best.